to this episode of the Wagging Tails podcast. This is episode 43. Now, the topic of this today is setting higher standards in the pet industry. Now, this might seem like a strange one to many, but when we take into account what has been happening over the past few years, and moreover what has been happening in the last couple of weeks and what we've seen, it's very important that we take this opportunity to talk about it. Now, for those of you that don't know, my name is Fraser Noble. I'm the founder of Noble Canine, and I'm a certified canine behaviour consultant. Now, this doesn't make me that special. It just means that I am an expert in canine behaviour. So I feel like I can talk about this with some kind of authority. And the reason I talk about that right now, and those of you listening will think Fraser's never spoken like that before. Well, effectively, this is because what we're talking about today is going to be triggering quite a lot of people, because it effectively puts a lot of professionals in the limelight for things that they are maybe not doing, and certainly for a lot of things that they shouldn't be doing that they are doing. Okay, so there has been an influx of messages coming through to me in the past week after an incident on Coney Island in Singapore. Now, basically what happened there was the owner of a daycare company kicked her own dog while they were on a pack walk, and it kicked up a massive fuss over, as you can imagine, quite a lot of places. However, I am not going to be going very, very deep into the ins and outs of each individual situation. Frankly, because I don't see the merit in doing that. I don't think it actually helps when we actually give a platform to those that have been effectively caught abusing dogs. So it's not something that I'm going to be doing. However, I will be mentioning some of the situations, and that's more so that people can understand why I am talking about this. Okay, so what I really want this episode to do is to talk directly to people like me, people that are working within the pet industry. I want people to hear this and to think, oh, we actually do need to do better. Or if we are doing well ourselves, we need to encourage others to do better as well. So this is why, for the professionals out there, I'm going to be hammering the science home. For the owners of dogs out there, this will also be useful, but I'm also going to be looking at the frustrations, which is where a lot of people actually end up turning to aversives out of frustration. Okay, we're going to be looking at what you can do instead. And we're going to be exploring the basics of humane, science-backed solutions to these common behavioural problems, so that you as pet owners can feel empowered to do appropriate, positive training correctly in your own home and with your own pets. Right, let's jump into the meat and potatoes of this. Why are we doing this? Okay, it is a very sad subject, but there has been a massive increase over the last few years of mistreatment by professionals all over the world. But I'm really going to only be mentioning the countries that we as Noble Canine operate in, because that's the ones I tend to keep an eye on. So that's obviously Singapore, where we're based, the UK, Australia, and the USA. So I'll mention a couple of those right now. 2021, a groomer was abusing a Maltese Shih Tzu. They were captured on CCTV in Australia, and they were basically slapping the dog, and there was really no reason for it. They said it was to keep the dog behaving, but realistically, that's not a thing. Effectively, they were fined, taken to court, and the overall consensus was that it was way too lenient. She was able to continue her operation. Now, that story comes from the New York Post. Next one is in the UK, from The Sun, maybe not the most reputable of papers, but one worth looking at. A pet sitter who was beating chihuahuas, specifically, claimed that she was doing this because she'd been bitten by every chihuahua that she'd ever cared for. Now, this doesn't make sense to me. Just say you don't want to look after the chihuahuas. But there we go. That one happened as well. That was in the UK. Dog groomer convicted of animal cruelty. This one was effectively caught on CCTV slapping the dog around again. So this was in the US. These things happen all over the place. But we're going to talk a little bit more about Singapore, because that's where a lot of our viewers are, and that's where we are at the moment. So the SPCA has reported a significant rise in animal cruelty and welfare cases. They have investigated 915 instances in 2023 alone. It'll be interesting to see what the 24 numbers are. But this is the highest numbers that they've ever done in the past 11 years. And it makes it very concerning, because a lot of these involved pet businesses. Now, this story comes straight from Mothership and the SPCA. The next one, the one that kicked all of this in the first place, the Coney Island incident. Now, this was basically a video of the owner of Storm Whiffers Daycare kicking her own dog in the face. There was a lot of back and forth online. It kicked up a massive fuss. But the basics of it is pet care professional doing something that's not required and unprofessional. Then we had the issue in January 2024 with Xavier and Pack, where they were filmed pushing and hitting dogs so that the dogs would sit nice for a photograph for their daycare clients. Again, not so great. That was that lodged an investigation with AVS. And that was from Channel News Asia. Then we've got Canine Connection investigation in 2022, where a dog had, as said by the Canine Connection trainers, put through Hell Week. And this was a massive issue where the trainer was filmed actually beating the dog with a steel bowl. And then you had the Platinum Dog controversy in the early 2019, and this was effectively abuse and negligence, where it ended up with a dog actually passing away, I believe. Now, all of these are straight from the news. So I'm not saying anything which isn't already out in the public eye, right? So the reason I went through this is so people can understand that this is not something that's made up. All of these are people that are professionals. Pet owners, pet parents, guardians, whatever you want to call yourselves, are paying these people good money to look after their pets. And this is their behaviour. And it's unacceptable. Flat out unacceptable. And it's something that boils me to my very core. And I do try to make sure when I talk about it that I keep a calm head and go through the actual reasons why it shouldn't be okay. Now, one thing I did notice with the back and forth online was some people saying, oh, there's so many people doing really horrible things to animals. This is low-level cruelty. Why are we caring about this? Well, quite frankly, any cruelty is cruelty. Doesn't matter if it's low-level or not. But the fact of the matter is that these guys are professionals. Shouldn't be happening at all. But for those people, I'm going to dive in a little bit of the science here. Effectively, what happens is something called cumulative stress. Now, this has been shown in studies that when stress is built up over time. Just like with humans, dogs can experience repeated small acts of aversive treatment, cruel treatment, yanks on the leash, harsh commands, shoved, slapped, any of those things create chronic stress. All of these small stressors end up building up, creating a much larger version of stress. Once this has compounded, it effectively has a massive impact on their behaviour and their physical health. It's kind of what in humans we would refer to as PTSD. So, in the Journal of Veterinary Behaviour, they actually published a study that showed that dogs that were being trained with aversive methods, even mildly aversive ones, showed significantly more signs of anxiety, stress, and avoidance behaviour than dogs that were being trained using positive reinforcement. Now, over time, that stress affects not just the dog with their behaviour, which it really, really can. It can create more reactivity. It can create avoidance, as we just said, all of those things. But it actually leads to digestion issues. It leads to lower immune response and effectively shortened the dog's lifespan. So, yes, people can say, oh, the low-level abuse, it's an easy way to get the dog to behave the way I want them to behave. Well, it's not easy for the dog anyway, and you are literally shortening your dog's lifespan. So if you truly loved your dog, you would never want to be doing these things. Right? So then the next thing that you see is, oh, but my dog loves me. It can't be that bad for them. This is honestly one of the most depressing psychological phenomena that we come across in both humans and animals. And this is what we call trauma bonding. Trauma bonding is a truly horrific thing because it's where a dog, or a human for that matter, but it's where a dog, due to a combination of dependency and attachment and stress, ends up displaying incredible loyalty and affection to a handler who mistreats them. Now, if I swapped those for, instead of dog, said wife, instead of handler, said abusive husband, the same thing applies. I cannot stress that enough. Okay, so it's a very misunderstood phenomenon, and it's where the animal's need for attachment overrides the impact of the mistreatment. And effectively, it is the same as abusive relationships, humans. Dogs, like people, will often bond with an abuser because they've got no alternative. And especially with dogs where they are completely reliant on us as carers, they really have no alternative. So just because a dog is behaving affectionately and loyal towards somebody who was abusing the dog, even at a low level or even at high levels, that does not mean that it's a healthy relationship. Because I'm sure nobody listening right now would agree with anybody that would say that being in an abusive relationship as a human is a healthy relationship. Okay? Now, this is one of the things that people try to get their head wrapped around, and is tough. So I'm going to cite something from a study by Dr. Nicholas Dodman, who's a very well-regarded animal behaviourist. And he effectively highlighted that dogs that experience trauma often show a profound need for attachment. So even if that attachment is with somebody that mistreats them, because of the mistreatment itself, the dog requires an even greater drive for attachment, and that unfortunately can end up being with the person that's actually abusing them. And again, guys, this is why dogs can appear very loyal or loving towards somebody that harms them. But make no mistake, that is not because the dog loves the person. It's not because the person's not doing wrong. It is survival based. It's Darwinism at its very darkest. Now, what I'll talk about now is something that's a little bit more what people need. That part was more for the professionals, just to remind them that what they're doing, if they're doing it, is not right. So we're going to look at the common frustrations and how to avoid getting annoyed and actually turning to an aversive method, which you now know is not going to be very good for your dog, or you, for that matter. So we're going to be looking at the frustration, and we're going to be looking at the solution that you guys should be putting in place even before these frustrations rear their head. One of the biggest ones, pulling on the leash while they're on a walk. So instead of jerking the leash back, instead of using a choke, a semi-choke, a prong, or any of the other wildly, do you know what, they're actually ineffective as well a lot of the time, but they're also very inappropriate. Instead of using any of that, you've got to train your dog. You know, training is not suppression. If I put a gun to your head and said, go and get me a beer from the fridge, I'm not training you to go and get me a beer from the fridge. You're going to go and get it because I am threatening you. Our bond is not going to be great. Our relationship's not going to be great. You're certainly not going to learn to get me a beer when my beer runs out. You're going to have to get a gun pointed at you, at least for a good length of time. Then you might be doing it out of fear, which means that you'll only do it with the person who you're scared of. That's suppression. Training, on the other hand, is using effectively positive reinforcement a lot of the time. That's actual education. You're educating them. Now, I'll very quickly say this before we go on. Positive reinforcement is not cookie cutting. It is not dishing out treats. If people think that's what positive reinforcement is, if they think that's what positive training is, they don't understand positive reinforcement training. You've got to remember, guys, that just because you may have come across a few bad positive trainers that didn't know what they were doing, doesn't mean that the methodology doesn't work. It just means that you came across a few people that didn't know what they were doing. There's folk that don't know what they're doing in every industry. So, food, affection, and play are positive reinforcers. There's way more than that. You get environmental reinforcers, such as allowing additional freedoms, such as allowing additional sniffing and things like that. These are very, very effective. But for direct reward, you want to be using food, affection, or play. You then pair that with a word or a clicker or whatever else. That word is the secondary reinforcer, which will eventually become conditioned. Then you can wean that primary reinforcer away. That's why when you watch a lot of my videos online, my dogs are not getting continuously treated. It's not because it's not positive reinforcement, it's because that secondary reinforcer has been conditioned. So don't get that twisted when we talk about positive reinforcement. A lot of it's just down to understanding how to actually do it properly. It takes good timing, it takes knowledge, it takes an understanding of behaviour. There's a lot of stuff that goes into it that a lot of people don't understand, and I want people to understand that before I jump into this. But back to pulling on the leash. Shuttle walks. Literally, if your dog's toy motivated, for example, grab a ball, hold it in your hand, walk slowly at first, just over short distances, so your dog is following you at heel effectively, back and forward, and then increase the distance. Increase your speed, slow your speed down, change direction, start adding cues, stop, start, fast, slow, all of those things that you want to do on walks. Ensuring that you're giving that ball to your dog with enough regularity that they're getting that happy hormone increase in their brain, which is exactly what you need to enforce that behaviour. So that's the first thing. The other thing you can do is simple techniques such as leash pressure guidance. We do have videos on this on the website, but leash pressure guidance is effectively a very gentle tug on the leash and the offering of food. The dog comes to get the food. With enough repetitions, every time that dog feels any slight pressure on the leash, they're going to come back towards you. If you have trained that properly, the dog will no longer pull on the leash. It works. It's worked with everything from Chihuahuas to Dobermans to Great Danes. and everything in between. We have worked with over 2,000 dogs in our time operating as Noble Canine, and we have never had to turn to anything other than positive reinforcement. So, the simplest way is, though, is if this seems a little bit too complicated for you, you're not sure what to do, if your dog pulls, simply stop. Your dog doesn't get to move forward if they're pulling the moment they're relaxed on the leash. Continue walking, they pull, you stop. Your dog's going to soon learn that they've got to be walking nicely to get a walk. So that's the easy way of doing it, but doing shuttle walks, doing luring, doing leash pressure guidance, doing pressure release, all of these would be far more effective. Stealing and scavenging is the big one. Okay, so effectively, this is when dogs are out on their walks and they're basically trying to graze. They see something, they try and pick it up and eat it. See something, try and pick it up and eat it. Well, before we even go into what you can do to help train your dog to stop that, if your dog is really bad for this and you think there's a chance that you might need to act really, really quickly, for example, you feel the need to slap your dog because the dog's going for something on the ground, that shouldn't even be an option. Your dog should be wearing a muzzle on the walks to prevent them from picking things up. Muzzles are not a bad thing. People have got this poor opinion of what muzzles are. We need to understand that muzzles are used from everything from the safety of groomers, safety of vets, safety of people handling the dogs, for the dog's self-control, for the dog's trying to stop the dog from vacuuming up the pathways outside, or if the dog does have reactivity or aggression, yes, that's obviously a big impact on that as well. So, muzzles, don't be scared of them. However, if you'd been doing the leash pressure guidance, which we just spoke about with the walking, this would be very, very useful for this one as well, because the moment you notice your dog's going for something, you give a very slight pressure on that leash, they're going to turn back to you anyway. And of course, leave it. I cannot stress enough how important it is to teach your dog leave it. It will save their lives potentially. Now, there's many methods of teaching leave it. My preferred method is by giving the dog a choice. I effectively start off with 2 pieces of food. I put 1 piece of food on the floor and cover it with my hand like that. And this piece is further away and is free to take. But I put this one on the floor first, so when the dog goes for it, I cover like this, distract with this. The moment they redirect to that one, I say leave it, and they get that. That's captured the behaviour. They've left the item on the ground. Then we start building that up to the point we drop. We don't need to cover. We just say leave it, and they automatically come for what we have. Build that up with distractions, distance, and duration till you're at the point where you can throw a kangaroo rib on the floor and say leave it from a distance, and they'll stop. So that you can pass otter poop and they don't go for it, or any of the other disgusting stuff that our dogs love to go for. You've got to work at this one. It's not the easiest. People will make excuses. They'll say, oh no, that doesn't work for me. Keep trying. I promise you, if you keep going, it will work. Almost every dog that I've ever met will be able to do it with this method. There's other methods that you can use, but they're not my preferred ones. If you do struggle with this and you need a little bit of additional help, don't hesitate to message us. Remember, every Monday on the Noble Canine Instagram page, we have an Ask Me Anything session. If you need help with that, ask me on that, and I'll show you how to do it on that video. So, always ask for help if things are a little bit more complicated, but you do want to be working on this so that you get to a point where you don't need to worry. Running away or not coming back. Recall is an absolute nightmare for a lot of dog owners. And this is where you hear them shouting at other people, don't worry, they're friendly, which is effectively saying, I'm really sorry, my dog's recall is not very good. And that's not great, but it's not an evil thing. People aren't doing it because they're bad. A lot of the time they just have never been shown how to do recall properly. Now, there's other things like stop, stay, things like that. These are all important. You can teach stop by doing the shuttle shuttle walks I was saying, and then as you stop, they're going to stop. You say stop, you are capturing that behaviour. But recall is a big one that I'm going to want to be looking at here. Instead of trying to explain it to you right here, what I'm going to do is in the show notes and in the comments on Facebook, I'm going to be putting a link to our video, which actually shows you how to do more advanced recall exercises. Now, I'm just going to post that into the chat now to make it easy for people so they can look at it later on, but it will be in the show notes as well. But effectively, you have got to be the most attractive thing in that walk, in that park, in that area for your dog. To do that, you've got to make yourself very, very interesting. You've got to make yourself a very high value person. The bond and the trust with your dog has to be very, very high. And not to flog a dead horse, as it were, but by using aversives, you're actually lowering your bond with your dog. That sounds harsh to some people, but I'll tell you right now, years ago, decades ago, I used to use balance training and I did aversives. And the dogs I had then, I used to think, oh, I'll never have a bond as good as this with another dog. The bond I have with all three of my dogs right now, using the methodology that I use, is far, far, far better than any other dog I've had before. And their behaviour is far better than any other dog I've had before. And these are 3 street dogs. The dogs I had before were all pedigrees. So it's not a breed trait thing, because I'll tell you right now, the street dogs can be tougher to train because their trust in humans is generally lower. So it is the methodology. However, moving on. Overexcitement. There is really no need to get annoyed at your dog for overexcitement. They are overexcited generally because they are overstimulated. An overstimulated dog is desperate to do everything, desperate to meet everyone. So this boils down to enrichment. You're going to make sure you are providing your dog with enrichment. And if you're not, it's time to start. The last episode we did on this podcast was actually on enrichment. So instead of going down that rabbit hole, I strongly advise you to go and have a listen of it. On that episode, I actually put Jay on the spot to create an enrichment program as we were doing this live. And in that, you can see how it gets put together. And it should help you be able to put together an enrichment program which suits your dog and suits your lifestyle, because that's also incredibly important. Now, there are other situations where things can get very frustrating, but those are the main ones when I was looking around, that people tend to turn to hitting their dog or screaming at their dog or yanking their dog away or hanging them by the leash. It's these ones that tends to happen with. So this is how you do it without having to do that. And I urge you all to work with your dogs so that you never need to do anything like that at all. So what I'm going to talk about now is I'm going to briefly look at the red flags and green flags when you're looking at pet professionals. Now, when it comes to choosing a pet professional, there are clear green flags and red flags to look out for. But it doesn't matter if you're looking for a vet, a trainer, a behaviour consultant, a groomer, a daycare, a walker, or anything at all. These are the ones you want to be looking out for. So, green flags, transparency. Transparency is key. If you ask them how or why they do something, they should be more than happy to tell you. That's why I don't hide how we do things online. I'm not one of these people that will say, oh, I don't want to show the techniques because I don't want them to pay. Look, people are going to need help regardless. Showing people how it's done is actually a great way of being transparent. And it's very, very important. Professionals must be transparent. For trainers, this means allowing you to take part in the training sessions, explaining not just what you're doing, but why you're doing it. Don't just say, oh, trainer said so, it's okay. No, ask the questions, challenge what they're saying. I love it when people challenge what I'm saying, because it means they're listening. It means they care. That's amazing, and that's what you want to have. And you want the same from the professionals. Same if you go to a groomer. If the groomer goes, oh no, you're not allowed to watch us grooming, why not? Some dogs do get a little bit more skittish when the owner's around, granted, I get that. But shouldn't you be able to watch a dog that's not yours then? Shouldn't you be able to see what the grooming techniques are so that you know that they're not harsh? So that they're not careless? There was another horrible incident where a dog was left on the grooming table with the slip leash on. The dog fell off the table and literally passed on. Was hung. So transparency is very, very important no matter what the professional is doing. Those who use reward-based training methods or reward-based behaviour shaping. Now, a lot of folk might try and argue with this, but at the end of the day, you're not going to do a job for nothing. Why do you expect your dogs to do it? Using reward-based methods is always a green flag in my book. Somebody who's calm, patient, and respectful to both you and your pet. In fact, I would go as far to say somebody that is respectful to everybody. Because if I was to walk into a lawyer's office, because I was wanting to hire a lawyer, and the lawyer was chewing out their assistant, but then really nice to me, that's a red flag. I'm not going to be happy about that. I'm probably not going to hire them. So it's the same here. If somebody's cruel to their staff or cruel to somebody else or cruel to their own dog, chances are they're going to do the same to you and your dog. We can't separate that kind of behaviour. We always talk about being calm, clear, confident, consistent. That's basic leadership. It's not just about training dogs. That's the green flag that you want to be looking out for. And being certified by an internationally recognised body. So the one I use is International Association of Animal Behaviour Consultants. Now, that's the IAABC, because they love a really long acronym. But there is others. You've got the fear-free based guys that they've got their own body. You've got a few others out there, British Dog Training Association, things like that. These are ones that are fairly well recognised and fairly good. But what you'll probably find is a lot of the ones that aren't so well recognised are the ones that are not using updated methodology. So keep an eye out for that as well. A great example of that actually is the changes that the AVS in Singapore have made to their approved trainers list. Now, I believe at the moment both the old list and the new list are still valid, but if memory serves me right, next year that old list becomes null and void. So anybody that was on the old list, they're no longer on that list. And everybody that's on the new list has to be accredited and certified by an internationally recognised body, as I was talking about. So that's something that's worth just noting and something being aware of, no matter who you're looking to hire. Red flags. Anyone that justifies physical punishment, corrections, intimidation, or anything along those lines as a necessary for control or subservience or anything like that, or even if they use words like obedience, like obedience and control shouldn't come from a place of threats and fear. Okay? People that are dismissive of your dog's emotional well-being, that's a huge red flag. But I also go as far to say people that are dismissive of your emotional well-being, of your feelings, of what you think, of the questions you ask, if they're not willing to answer, if they're dismissing you, that's a red flag, straight off the bat. And the exact opposite of what I just said earlier was somebody who's hiding their methods whether that be in training or grooming or walking or daycares, whatever it is, if they're not allowing you to observe, if they're not sending videos and things like that, that's a red flag. Now, there is a lot more that I could go on about, but those give you the basics. And if you see any of those red flags, I would strongly urge you to look for somebody else. Because remember that our pets rely on us to ensure their safety and well-being. They rely on us to ensure their happiness. So we've got to be the ones that make the choice to ensure that happiness, that safety, that well-being. That's our responsibility as animal guardians, as our dog guardians. Something that we should all take very, very seriously. Now, this has been a slightly shorter episode, and that's somewhat deliberate because I wanted to make sure it was short enough for people that are listening in their cars or on their earpieces or anything like that. They're able to get the full episode done on their commute. But my closing thoughts are effectively this, and I'm actually going to find the meme that I created a while ago because I feel like it's very applicable here. And it is effectively this. Self-control is strength. Calmness is mastery. You have to get to the point where your mood doesn't shift based on the actions of others. Don't allow your emotions to overpower your intelligence. Okay? That was self-control is mastery. Self-control is strength. Calmness is mastery. You have to get to a point where your mood doesn't shift based on the actions of others. Don't allow your emotions to overpower your intelligence. That's a very, very important one for people that know what they should be doing and they end up doing other things because they are being somewhat influenced by others. I can't remember the exact quote, but there's an old Stoic quote which effectively says, to be strong, you have to be gentle. And to be gentle, you have to be strong. If you're not strong while trying to be gentle, you're not being gentle, you're being harmless. And if you're not gentle while being strong, you're not being strong, you're being out of control. That always resonates with me. That's something that I always think about. Not just when it comes to dogs, not just when it comes to animals. I try to take that through life, but specifically when we are working with animals that we cannot communicate with as easily as we can with each other. So to all of the pet professionals listening, let's set the bar higher. Let's do better. And for the pet owners, for the pet guardians, let's demand a higher bar for pet professionals. Let's not use those that are putting our dogs in harm's way, that are putting their own dogs in harm's way because, oh, it's my dog, I can do what I like. Those that will cut corners for cost, have groups that are too large on a walk, putting the dogs at risk. All of this is negligence. All of this is what people are calling low-level abuse. It's still a problem. We should not be accepting it. We have got evidence based on behavioural science and psychology that shows that positive humane treatment works. We know from a fact that by using positive training methods properly, as I said, not everybody uses it properly, but if you know what you're doing and you do it properly, it works. And there's many, many different techniques within that umbrella because every dog is different and there's different techniques that you can use for different dogs, whether that be social, whether it be directive, whether it be exploration. There's many, many, many more as well. but it does work. So actually, it's irrelevant that people can say that balanced training and aversive training works. Okay, let's pretend for a second that it's not suppression. Let's pretend it's genuinely education, which it's not. Let's pretend for a second. If you have a choice between doing a method which looks after the well-being of the animal and ensures that your emotional health of the animal is going to be looked after, and you don't have to put your animal through any pain, discomfort, threats. You don't need to put your relationship with your animal on the line. Shouldn't we be doing that instead of whatever else we used to do 30, 40 years ago before we had this information? Even if it did work, we should be moving to the stuff which is more humane. I think that's something that people need to be thinking about. So, with that said, if you're facing challenges with your dog and you feel like your only way forward is aversives, I urge you, please don't go down that route. If you're facing these challenges, don't hesitate to seek help. Find a good positive trainer, find a good behaviour consultant, and they will help you understand. Remember that our dogs are our responsibility, and we need to work together to make the pet industry a truly safer place for our animals. Okay, guys, that was a fairly serious one on this episode. For those of you that didn't like that tone, I'm sorry, but it was a very important topic. Thank you for joining the Wagging Tails. Don't forget to subscribe to our social media. Don't forget to join in on our Ask Me Anything sessions on Mondays on our Instagram. And don't forget that every second Wednesday we do these podcasts live on our Facebook page. Please join us. And until next time, stay ethical, stay evidence-based, and look after your dogs. Have a good one, guys.